Okay. Okay, so basically it's like these are some of the stuff that I've researched and also interviewed on. Yeah, it's like interviewed people for this. So there were a number of Nyonyas that I have actually interviewed, and there are quotes that I'm using in the slides to kind of like show you their responses, and I guess what they think as well. I guess at the end of this, I would like you guys to decide for yourselves whether you think our culture is a patriarchy or a matriarchy. Yeah, I don't think it's so clear cut. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of like take you through some of the definitions of these terms and how people are kind of like thinking of matriarchy and patriarchy, and then show you sort of like, well, how our culture takes or sees certain things, and then we can perhaps discuss and even debate whether it is a patriarchy or a matriarchy. Okay, so I'm gonna open with this quote. This is from one of the interviewees that I interviewed. Yeah, it's like so the question that was asked was the idea of the garang lihai nyonya. Is this something you can relate to in the series and real life? So the questions for the interview were basically sort of like based on the little nyonya. Yeah, it's like I kind of like picked out certain constructions about from that, and basically also from plays and just cultural imaginings that we have of the Nyonyas. Yeah, so one of them was this idea of your garang and lihai nyonya. And the response of this person was that I'd say there's truth to it. I see it in myself, I guess. And then I asked, is that cultural? And she responded, I think my mom was the domineering one over my dad in general with matters in the household. I grew up in that kind of household. To think that my dad would have chosen a woman who takes the lead in those areas, it could be something he was used to in his household. Yeah, it's like, so so that's one of the interviewees. Now, to go to the whole idea of patriarchy, I'm looking at Sylvia Walby. Do I need to cue you as to when? Okay, are we at the patriarchy slide? Yeah, okay. So Sylvia Walby in 1990 basically talks about patriarchy in these 6 different areas, I guess, aspect of culture. Yeah, it's like, so paid employment, household production, culture, sexuality, violence, and the state. Okay, and I guess what we will be looking at with the Peranakan culture would be essentially the household production. Yeah, it's like, because that is the domain of the Nyonyas. Okay, so in terms of that, I think we kind of like know, usually in the private domains of the home, your Nyonya is pretty much rule the roost, I think. Yeah, and the Baba actually takes the public space where it's actually very gendered, particularly, and we're particularly talking about your colonial times. Yeah, it's like, with where they were in the public space, where they were actually compradors, or the bridge between the British and the Malays. Yeah, it's like, and they took a lot of the commercial opportunities that were at hand, and that was how they became wealthy and prominent, and they became basically the elite community in the Straits Settlements. Yeah, so you have them sort of like becoming Kapitan, Tengchus, justices of peace, holding public offices. Yeah, and in the Strait Settlements as well, I think you can see roads, hospitals, bridges, towers that are named after them. Yeah, it's like, so I think that's quite clear that they really filled the public sphere. They also had social clubs and associations, yeah, which I think the Singapore Peranakan Association was the first that was started, and then eventually Malacca and then Penang. But aside from these social clubs, we also have them mimicking the British, yeah, where they were into sports and hunting as well. So I've brought some books there. It's like, you know, there's a book there, 50 Remarkable Lives, that actually looks at, it was actually done by the Peranakan Museum in Singapore, and it looks at 50 prominent Peranakans. And you can sort of like see their lives and their contribution to society and how they actually built the Straits Settlements. So I think it's quite clear that, you know, they really was very much part of the public sphere during the colonial times. Yeah. So the next slide I have is of Tan Kim Ching. Yeah, he is one of my ancestors. It's like, you know, he was the son of Tan Tock Seng. Yeah, I think people who are familiar with Singapore will know about Tan Tock Seng and the free hospital that he started, which has eventually been named after him in Singapore. Yeah, so this is his eldest son, and he was very prominent. Yeah, it's like he was actually the person who introduced Anna Leonowens to the Siamese court. So if you all have seen The King and I, she was the governess that he introduced to the Siamese court. He was the person who basically sort of like pacified or negotiated for the Perak Wars. It's like, you know, so politically he was really quite a prominent person during that time. Yeah. It's like, can you hear me? It's like, okay. Okay. Okay, so that is, I think, yeah, one example of some, you know, our prominent babas in the public space. Yeah. So he was born in 1829 and he died in 1892. Okay, which the 1870s to about 1920s is basically the golden age of the Peranakan culture. That was when the culture kind of peaked. It's like, and that is the time that we all sort of like nostalgically hold on to in terms of what Baba-Nyonya and culture is sort of like about. Yeah. So okay, so moving on, the next slide, I'm just gonna sort of like take you through our Chinese patrilineal system, yeah, with the Peranakan culture. You have a question or?
Excuse me if
Sure.
I were just to butt in a little, but I think perhaps just a short question so that the audience has got a better understanding. Perhaps you could explain in layman's term the difference between patriarchal and patrilineal, because there are two different words. So here we are talking about the topic, is our culture patriarchal, not patrilineal. So Dr. David, could you explain the difference just to us right
like,
now,
you know,
patrilineal and patriarchal?
So patriarchal would basically be a patriarchy. Yeah, it's like where men actually are dominant, or they basically control society and everything else. So that's essentially what patriarchy means, right? So patrilineal is basically in terms of inheritance and in terms of how things are sort of like continued is through the male line. Yeah, so patrilineal is basically inheritance going to the boys, right? So if you have matrilineal, then it will be going to the girls. So an example of that would be your Minangkabau culture, which is patrilineal. Yeah, so it's like, you know, for the Minangkabau, the harta actually goes to the daughters and not to the sons. Yeah, it's like, you know, so so that's the difference between patrilineal and matrilineal. Yeah, it's like, you know, so there is a slight difference in terms of patriarchy and patrilineal. So you have the Baba-Nyonya culture that actually follows the Chinese patrilineal system, yeah, which is actually very strongly adhered to, namely through ancestor worship. Yeah, it's like, which really is what the Peranakan culture centers around. Yeah, it's like, that is what holds the culture, and that is very patrilineal. So you have your Rumah Abu, which is basically the ancestral home, basically. Yeah, it's like, so the whole idea of your Rumah Abu is that the Abu is the ashes that actually come from your joss sticks. Yeah, it's like, that represents your ancestors. So worshipping of your ancestors, and hence that's the term that has become used for ancestral home with the Peranakans. Right, and this is also very interesting because this also shows our very unique patois. Yeah, it's like, this is a Malay term, Rumah Abu, but it's like if you talk to the Malays about Rumah Abu, they will have no idea what you're talking about, because it's like, it's really a Chinese idea, just a Malay term. Yeah. Um, and so with your Rumah Abu, the responsibility and the maintenance goes basically to your sons, or your eldest son, right? The eldest son is supposed to carry that on, and the Rumah Abu will basically hold the Sinchi, or the ancestral tablets of the family, where you can trace your lineage, basically. Yeah, it's like, and that maintenance is very important in terms of what Peranakan culture is all about. Okay. Um, so so of course your eldest son will have like the largest share, because that responsibility goes to him. Yeah. So in terms of this patrilineal system, you have the very important idea of siring sons, basically. Yeah, so it's like, it's very important to actually have sons, so that you have your turunan, so that your nama will also turun. It's like and the family name, or the family name will basically continue, right? So what is also interesting is that this gives license basically for gundates, yeah, which are concubines in your Peranakan culture. If the principal wife is not able to produce a son, the patriarch actually has the right to take on gundates, so that he can actually have a son to continue the name, and to pass down the Rumah Abu to. Yeah, and so this is really quite interesting in terms of, like, these sorts of complex dynamics within the Peranakan culture. Yeah. The other thing that is of significance is your tonghuan, yeah, which is the lantern that the eldest son will carry at your funeral for your parents. Yeah, it's like, and that's only for the eldest son, and no female can actually carry that tonghuan. Yeah, it's like, so again, it's like, very important patrilineal system. And if the eldest son dies, it's like, the second son doesn't take this responsibility on. Yeah, it goes on to the next generation, which means the eldest grandson. Yeah, so this is the system of what the Peranakans actually sort of like follow. So your genealogical records follow your Chinese patrilineal system. Therefore, it's very hard actually to trace Nyonyas, yeah, in our genealogical records. And I think anyone who has basically sort of like tried to trace their female ancestors might find that, you get lots of problems, because it is not as continuous as it is in terms of recording the sons. Yeah. Um, and of course, the patrilineal inheritance system. So usually your harta, the estate, whatnot, will go to the sons. Yeah. And the jewelry will go to the daughters. Yeah, it's like, and the daughters-in-law. I don't know if you guys have been sort of like keeping up with what's come up recently, like the Ghost Bride. Yeah, it's like, which is a series that's in Netflix, and Malaysia is sort of like boasting its first sort of Netflix series with that. And it's quite interesting actually if you sort of like read the novel or the film, because it premises this your whole ancestor worship, and this whole system of continuing the Rumah Abu. Although there's all kinds of cultural adulteration that has sort of like happened with the book and with the series, but that's the whole idea. You have a ghost bride, not so much of the idea of her being married to a ghost, but more so that the Nyonya can continue your rumah abu. Yeah, it's like, you know, semayang abu and whatnot, and continue that to the next generation, which is of prime importance to Peranakan culture. Yeah. Yes.
There's a question from Zoom, from Professor Stephen Hall. Are there any instances where the name has moved across gender to a powerful Nyonya when even after 3 or more concubines, no son appeared?
No such. I have not come across that. It's like yeah, I mean it's quite rare after 3 or 4 concubines not to have sons, I think. Yes, it's like, you know, and this is the thing too. It's like then they will adopt, or what they call what is it? No, it's not anak. I think of the term when pang kueh pang. Yes, anak kueh pang. It's like, you know, so
Kueh pang.
yeah. So usually it's like a nephew or whatever that they will sort of like, yeah, you know, adopt so that there is turunan. It's like yeah. So this is usually what happens. I have an example later, I think, that might be of interest to Stephen. It's like in terms of, you know, this crossing the line, but I'll get to that. You know,
Just hang on. One question.
Uncommon in those days when you didn't have any children to like, okay, I got 3, 4 sons, I give you one. You know, in those days it wasn't very uncommon, right? But to give away a daughter, sons may be more rare. But there have been cases where you have a son, you actually give it to a family that's be left barren children.
exactly. It's like, you know, and usually in cases like these, they will be inheriting the estate, right? So it's like, you know, who the natural mother would also be quite welcoming of the idea, I think, rather than sort of like you know, not wanting to give up their sons or whatever. So yeah, they were a very close-knit community. Yeah, so it's like I say, usually nephews or whatever, it's like and there are cases where it's like, you know, they may have adopted and then later on actually gave birth to their own biological son. Yeah, it's like, you know, so yeah, so that was kind of like the reality, yeah, of the culture at that time.
Someone said similar to a godson.
I don't think so. It's more adopted, yeah, because they will inherit, you know, the whole estate, and we're talking about huge
And he carries
estates
the
here. It's
family
like,
surname
exactly.
also. A few of my aunts and uncles also kueh pang, and they carry my family surname. So it's not really godson.
Exactly. It's like okay.
Excuse me, just now you said a very you were referring to the golden era, which was quite a long time ago, when I can't quite remember. Let's talk about more recent personalities. For example, Tun Tan Siew Sin and Tun Tan Cheng Loong. They were very, very prominent babas of this. So do you think they were more inclined towards the matriarchy or the patriarchy system? Did you do any research of that, Dr. David?
Well,
Because I was quite
mean,
curious about.
if you're talking about Tan Siew Sin, it's like, you know, he's got no sons, right? It's like, you know, he's only exactly he's only got daughters now. So it's like, you know, so actually it ends with Tan Siew Sin, right? It's like, you know, the turunan or whatever. It's like, you know, it's the, so I don't know how the family is kind of like working out who.
No, my question
on.
was, it's not whether it's patrilineal or not, because it's he did not have any male offspring, Tun Tan Siew Sin. But in his household, was it more because he was living in which 101 Huron Street, was it more towards the matriarchy system or the patriarchy system in his household? Do you think because he was very prominent?
I mean,
Were they adopting which kind of?
Well, Tan Cheng Lock and Tan Siew Sin were big public figures, right? It's like, you know,
Who were their
so,
wives?
I'm not that sure who their wives were. And these are the thing, it's like, you know, your domestic culture is really privy only to the family, right? And what I actually would like to hear from you guys today is your own experiences of your Peranakan home. Yeah, it's like, you know, and what you see. So can we just sort of like, I think your question will get answered as we go on. Yeah, it's like, you know, so we just hold on to that question. It's
We
like,
will
you know,
allow you to finish your
exactly. It's like, you know, if you have the same question, whatever, later on, we can always, you know, bring it up again. Yeah. So, okay. So let me just continue. It's like, you know, I have this quote here from Hujui's book, yeah, where she says, while the public domain was dominated by the Baba, the home was more often than not run and ruled by a strong-willed Nyonya who has been trained to cope with a variety of household and social tasks. She was managing director par excellence and the supreme boss of the palatial Baba-Nyonya residence. Upon marriage, the demure young Nyonya, still a child, found herself thrust into a responsible position which increased in difficulty as she embraced motherhood. Added to the family duties were her social obligations befitting her status in society. By the time she became a mother-in-law and a grandmother, she would have acquired some confidence in social matters. When she rose to the position of matriarch in charge of running an extended family under one roof, the Nyonya would have emerged as an assertive, sometimes even bossy woman. The mature Nyonya ladies who gaze confidently from old portraits have a commanding air and also convey an impression of sound common sense. The matriarchs seem to assume precedence over their sons upon the death of their husbands. While wielding their authority, Nyonya mothers doted upon their sons, and the result was that many a mature Baba, though he had status and was respected in the outside world, often continued to submit to an uncompromising mother at home. Yeah, it's like I think she captures that very well. It's like, you know, I know from my own family, paternal and maternal, it's like, you know, I think that's very much a reality. Yeah, so I would like to hear from yeah, you guys. It's like, you know, what you think and your own sort of like, you know, family experiences. Okay, so your next slide is like, you know, I have this picture of these three Nyonyas. Then I think it's really quite interesting. Yeah, it's like, you know, I don't think they bear any resemblance to each other at all. Yeah, so it's like, you know, I don't think they are sisters. It's like, you know, what is their relationship to each other? I think is really quite interesting. I mean, yeah, they could be in-laws. They could all be wives of a patriarch. It's I'm not sure what the source is. I got this from well, online. Yeah, it's like, you know, yeah, exactly. You know, from their from the way they dress, it's like from the croissant to their hairdos. I think it's more Penang Nyonyas than Malaccan Nyonyas.
Someone online said Turkey players.
I don't know about Turkey players with a portrait like that. Yeah, it's like, you know. Yes, so you know, I thought that's kind of interesting, and this is again, I think, really quite interesting in terms of how a Peranakan home is actually run. It's like, you know, if you actually have all these generations with all your different daughters-in-law and also gundes, it's like, you know, the power politics in the home is really quite complex. Yeah, it's like, you know, I mean, I remember my my kuku and my ee, who sort of, you know, the experiences of their childhood. It's like, you know, my kuku was going like, oh, it was great. Like, you know, growing up, you know, in your Peranakan extended family, there was always food, you know, in the kitchen and whatnot. It's like, and his sister, she would say it's like, you know, oh, it was just hell being, you know, in that political sort of like climate. It's like she would come home every day and bury herself in her studies just to be kept out of the politics of the home. Yeah, it's like, you know, because she would see aunties bickering with, you know, the gundates and yeah, daughters-in-law and whatnot. It's like, you know, so she was just really shutting herself out from that. Okay.
From this photograph, right? Who's the most powerful person? The person in the center or
I am also sort of like, you know, asking that question as I'm looking at this photograph, right? It's like, you know, the two ladies on the side actually look more, well, older than the Nyonya in the center, isn't it? But I think the Nyonya in the center probably has more power, right? It's like, you know, you look at her, the jewelry on her bun. It's like, you know, it's a lot more than the other two, the other two Nonyas. So I don't know if, you know, maybe she was the favorite gunde. It's like this is the thing, right? I mean, it's like these power struggles are all specific to each of those households. I mean, if you guys have seen Raise the Red Lantern, it's like, and how the women sort of like wield power within yeah, a wealthy family. It's like, you know, that is very much what Peranakan homes are, especially when you have, you know, so many generations within within the household. Yeah, it's like, any other question?
yeah. So there are two comments from online. Kenneth Go says, my grandmother rules the household and my grandfather goes out to enjoy himself.
Well, exactly. It's like, I mean, if you I'm just
He
thinking
encapsulates it very well.
I'm just thinking of the Chan Museum in Laka. Yeah, I mean, if you guys are familiar with that, it's like the upper chamber. It's like, you know, there is this locking mechanism with the staircase, yeah, where it will lock anybody out of your upper house at a certain time, or that can be done. Yeah, it's like, you know, and the running joke with the guides is that, well, this is how the matriarch controls the house. It's like, you know, so if the patriarch comes home after a certain time, tidur bawah. It's like, you know, you don't get to come into the bedroom or even to the, you know, upper portion of the house. Yeah, it's like, you know, so who holds the power, you know, with Peranakan culture, like the patriarchs or the matriarchs? And this is the question I guess I'm asking, and I'm trying to sort of like, you know,
Perhaps we can get some comments from the live audience here about their personal experience and how living in when they were young, how has it shaped your life? Whether living seems excuse me.
Kus banget.
So just forgive this little diversion. So anyway, perhaps it's quite a good time since Dr. David here is inviting observations from the live audience here. Perhaps anybody would like to speak about your experiences when you were young. Yeah, Dr. Lee.
The whole complexity of Baba-Nyonya culture, right? Because the Chinese traders, merchants came from China, couldn't bring the wives along, couldn't bring the women folk, couldn't bring the mothers-in-law, came over 6 months, you know, when they hooked up with the local women. And therein comes this complexity, where they married the local women. And then local women, when you say local women, could be women from Indonesia, because it was a hot city, there's a lot of intermarriage. And don't forget, local women means Nusantara women. Some come from very strong matriarchal societies like the women house. Sumatra, the Bataks. So the Penang, Peranakan community, there's a lot of influence from Medan, from Sumatra. And the southern Peranakan communities, a lot of influence from Java, Indonesia, Bali. And very, in terms of form, it's very Chinese. So it's very patriarchal. Patrilineal, you must follow the real line, or you must have Confucian values, you must have filial piety, respect for the elders, rumah abu. But in terms of the essence, in terms of substance, it's very female, very woman, very matriarchal. So it's not so clear cut as you say, it's not, it is matriarchal, it's not matriarchal, it's a whole partnership of factors. Society-wise, it's very male, but as you go to everyday living, it's very female. And therefore, I think we owe a lot of credit to our women of the past for not just giving in to submit to the neo-patriarchal system. No, they're very feisty. Sometimes when daughters get married, no, you don't go and stay with son-in-law, you come and stay in the family, naturally local ethnicity.
Yeah.
So they love the daughters. And I came from a family where when people die, they don't just give their sons. They make sure their daughters get as well. So I think in that sense, if we compare the society back in Confucian China, our Baba-Nyonya, the women were much different, much better. I think some of the things like little Nyonya, where the woman was so desperate, she jumps into the well. No Nyonya ever jumped into the well. So I think this entire
Yes, it's like, you know, so thanks, Sukim, for that. It's like, you know, I will actually be going through some of the points, kind of like showing you the historical context of what Sukim has just said. Yeah,
I
It's
just to add on to a little bit before we digress further to Dr. Lee's comments, I would want to say that, would you say that back then our forefathers were already practicing division of labor? That means there's a clear mark, there's a clear demarcation between household matters and outside matters. So who rules the household? We know. Outside matters, the men are seen to be doing that. So in hindsight, I think it certainly helped in keeping the peace within the family because there was a clear-cut division of labor. So you know what you have to do, I know what you have to do. What do you think about adding to Dr. Lee's
Yes, it's like, you know, in
observation?
fact, in terms of what you say, I think there is a quote that I have later on from one of my interviewees who actually basically says that, yeah, it's like, you know, so your babas basically just bring home the bread and bacon. It's like, yeah, and the Nyonyas rule the roost. It's like, you know, they and like the quote I had earlier from Kujui's book, it's like, you know, they have a very high function. It's like, you know, they're not just any Nyonyas, but they have status in society. They have to maintain all those social obligations as well. So it's like, you know, your controlling Nyonya have reasons to be controlling. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Okay, anyways, it's like, you know, let me just go on to the historical sort of like context. I think this will kind of like make a bit clearer what Sukim was sort of like saying earlier on. Yeah.
Just one more comment from
Sure.
online. So Ken Yap says the mother had control of her son even at home. Yes. But what I would like to know is if that applies even if he was someone famous like Tan Cheng Lock. And would Tan Cheng Lock's wife have any power over him in the public sphere? Quietly in the background, of course, as per what you said.
Yes, it's like, you know, I mean, I can't answer that question with Tan Cheng Lock. I mean, because I am not from that family. Yeah, but yes, it's like, you know, there probably is. It's like, I think in most cases, the babas are the ones who have to, they are in the public sphere. So, you know, the politics and whatnot, they will have to deal with that. And usually I think the Nyonyas just leave them to do that. It's like, you know, and like what Lina is saying, that there's that clear demarcation. It's like, you know, whereas, and the Nyonyas will just kind of like deal with your domestic, you know, scenes and whatnot. So they, you know, I think they had very clear roles most of the time. And of course, it's like, you know, some families will say that, no, it's like, you know, my family, you know, the patriarch actually called the shots for everything, right? My great-grandfather was one of those. It was like, even though, you know, the women were running around the house, at the end, it was like, you know, his word was final kind of thing. You know, he decided who could marry who and who could not marry who. which was usually sort of like within the Nyonyas domain. Yeah.
So perhaps you could finish your
Yeah.
slides and then we'll open up to the
Sure.
floor. Yeah.
Okay. So the slide with your historical and cultural context. Yeah. Okay. So the Peter Lee in his book says that Nyonyas were slave women of heterogeneous origins. Yeah. Bali, Sulawesi, Papua, Thailand, Burma, and coastal India. So a lot of the Nyonyas were actually from these backgrounds. Yeah, it's like, and it was a time when Muslim had or Islam hadn't really set in yet, which is why you also have a lot of these other indigenous cultures that I think really influenced and shaped Peranakan culture. Yeah, so there's this interesting Kapitan in Batavia, which is Jakarta today. Yeah, it's like, Kapitan Gan Lee, who died in 1648. Now his widow, Madam Bali, which is actually a transliteration of the word Bali, succeeded him. Okay, she was the first and the only female Kapitan in Batavia's history.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really interesting. It's, to the extent that we actually have a Nyonya Kapitan, in history. Yeah. So this shows you, like, your patriarchal or matriarchal sort of like, settings are not so set in Peranakan culture. Yeah. And as sort of like what Sukim was pointing out earlier, Chinese merchants were traveling, yeah, and it's not just the Chinese merchants, but all your other races as well, with Indians and the Arabs and whatnot. They were stuck here for like 6 months, and this is how your Peranakan culture came about, right? They married local women because they were stuck here for 6 months, and this I think also references, and I think your whole Merantau idea with Malay or Minangkabau culture is also plays significance. Yeah, it's like, where men are encouraged to travel and seek, success, wealth, whatever, and the women actually stay back and they take care of the house and even the businesses. Yeah, and this is why your Nyonyas are really also very enterprising. It's like
Business saving.
exactly. It's like, they and they were very independent, because the thing was that, like, you don't see your husbands for 6 months. I don't even know if they actually miss their husbands. And sometimes it's like the husbands will go back to their primary or their Chinese wives and homes and never return. Yeah, it's like, so it's really quite interesting. I think this context for Nyonyas in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So there's the whole sort of like Merantau with Minangkabau culture. There's also their patrilineal system, yeah, which I think influences Peranakan culture because they're so close. I mean, Negeri Sembilan is just next to Malacca. Yeah. And the other thing too is that with Chinese culture, we have this whole idea of your jinchui, yeah, which is your matrilocal marriages. So with the Hokkiens, it's like, if they are very rich, quite often they will take on sons-in-law and they will marry into the wife's family, which is your matrilocal marriages. Yeah, it's like, they'll fund everything, they'll take care of everything in terms of the sons-in-law. And this is great, especially for your Singkates, yeah, your newcomers, because when the Peranakan sort of like see potential in these Singkates, they will sort of like take them in, yeah, and then you basically just marry and you get status and wealth. Yeah, so it was very convenient for the Singkates, is that there were a lot of marriages like that. So like in terms of like evidence, it's quite difficult to sort of see evidence in terms of how Minangkabau culture may have influenced our culture. Yeah, but what is also interesting is that within your Hokkien vocabulary, there is a term for matrilocal marriages. Yeah, which I think is very much practiced by the Peranakans more than the non-Peranakan Chinese.
What is the term called? What is the term
Chin
called?
Chui.
Chin Chui. Oh yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, so that's the other sort of like interesting thing. And of course, a lot of Nyonyas also inherited exorbitant wealth. Yeah, it's like, because your babas were your compradors, it was like, they assisted your colonial powers and took all the commercial opportunities that were at hand. Yeah, so usually it's like when they die, it's like, there was a lot of wealth involved, and a lot of Nyonyas inherited the wealth. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, I think this is very interesting, yeah, where I have called that slide Nyonyas privileged and valued. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, your Chinese culture is very patrilineal and very patrilocal. Yeah, it's like, I think there is this Chinese saying where it says, a woman who is born, comes under her father. When she marries, she comes under her husband. And when her husband dies, she comes under her son. Yeah, it's like, that is very Chinese. It's like, I don't think you see that in Peranakan culture at all. It's like, I think that's pretty much non-existent. Yeah, it's like, with our Minangkabau influences and whatnot. So with Peranakan culture, it's patrilineal, but it's also matrilocal. Yeah, it's like, so with a lot of times we take on sort of like the Singkate sons-in-law and into the family. And it's also matrifocal, yeah. So it's like, with the southern Peranakans, we have this term that says cuci kaki naik ranjang, yeah, with your not so sort of like nice term for matrilocal marriages, but yeah, you can sort of like understand the idea behind that, yeah. So although boys are very valued, Peranakans do not practice female infanticide. Yeah, it's like, in China, you have generations, hundreds of years where they actually kill their female daughters. Yeah, it's like, that doesn't happen in Peranakan culture. Yeah, it's like, okay, and duit tete, which is what you are supposed to sort of like give your the kiasai or the groom giving to the mother-in-law in terms of raising the Nyonya that he marries. It's like, that is usually not accepted, or if it's accepted, just a small token is taken and then it's returned. Yeah, it's like, Peranakans do not sell their daughters. Yeah, it's like, so Nyonyas are very valued in the culture, okay, which I think is very unique.
And they were very progressive too.
Very unique to the culture. Nonya's feet are never bound. Okay, it's
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
they have big feet. It's like, yeah.
That's true.
And there were no shortages of Nyonyas. Yeah, it's like, so there was very stringent control over access of their daughters. And usually their daughters will all kawin samkai, yeah, which means it's like, it is the altar that's set up for the Jade Emperor, and that is your official marriage. Yeah, it's like, gunde tak ada kawin samkai. Yeah? It's like, gunde is just brought into the household. There is no sort of like formal official ceremony of marriage with gundes or concubines. Yeah, but usually it's like Nyonyas are primary principal wives. It's like, they do not become secondary wives with the exception of your ganti tike. Yeah, which is basically when the principal wife dies and there's no one to sort of like look after the children and whatnot. At times the sister might step in and become, the second wife, but even as the second wife, she's still the principal wife, yeah, in the household because the sister is dead. And that whole idea is that so that she will actually not mistreat her nephews and nieces because, it's her own blood, and that she will actually care for them. Yeah, so this is sort of like the context of your Nyonyas. It's like, it's only during the Second World War that, out of desperation, some Peranakan families might give their daughters as second wives or gunde. Yeah, and that is just your Second World War. But aside from that, it's like Nyonyas never become secondary wives. Okay, so and then of course education for girls as well. Yeah, I mean if you're familiar with Queenie Chang and her memoirs of a Nyonya, and also
Queen's Counsel.
Mrs. Lee Chun Guan, sorry.
Queen's Counsel wasn't it? One of them. It's okay. It's okay.
It's
You can
like,
just
yeah,
moving on.
and Mrs. Lee Chung Guan as well, which I will sort of like talk about later. It's like, you know, they were educated, and I believe it's like, you know, the Nyonyas were probably the first educated women in the Straits Settlements, if not Southeast Asia. Yeah, it's like yeah. So this is I think quite interesting about our Peranakan culture. Usually your husband is your Nyonya is as well educated as your husband, and might even be better educated if her husband was a Sinke. Yeah, it's like, you know, which might be the case. So we have examples of like Lee Chunyo, who was your first female queen scholar and the first female physician in the Straits Settlements. The next slide will show pictures of her. Yeah. And then you also have Babas who actually set up schools for girls, like your Singapore Chinese Girls School, yeah, by Dr. Lim Boon Keng and Sir Song Ong Siang. So I think, you know, this gives you kind of like an idea of the cultural historical context of Nyonyas, yeah, which I think is very different from women in China. Okay, are there any questions or?
There is a question from online. Kenya, he says, sorry to keep going on about it, but if say a Baba was out at a public function with both his mother and wife, and he did something unseemly, would he be reprimanded there on the spot by the wife or the mother or both? Or would they wait till they got home? And I keep asking that because I have seen many husbands obviously controlled by their wives, even in China.
I won't be surprised. It's like, you know, because the Nyonyas don't take it. I mean, okay, this is my personal experience when I was in Melbourne. Yeah, it's like, you know, my uncle's ex-wife, who is Italian, her mother remarried to Grolo, who was like, you know, the richest man in Melbourne. Yeah, it's like, you know, and at one I think it was her birthday party, you know, that he held for her. He smacked her on the butt. Okay, and I was so disgusted. It's like, you know, I'm just going like, being, you know, Peranakan and being raised by, you know, our matriarchs, I just found that so offensive. Yeah, but I think it's quite possible for Nyonyas to actually berate their husbands in public. You will never find a Baba smacking a Nyonya in her butt. It's like, you know, exactly. It's like, you know,
Just an observation, Dr. David. To an outsider looking in, an outsider who is a non-Baba, non-Nyonya, number one, he looks at all the garang Nyonya, very garang, sampai pegang cengsi, kerja rumah, sama kuali. I've seen my grandmother do it. Number two, an outsider looking in at all the formal portraits, looking at the matriarch sitting in a tight bun, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, cucuk sanggul, pakai baju panjang, worse, kaki duduk, kang. And next to her, the husband wearing a nice suit, looking as demure as possible. I can't imagine him trying to look as garang as the wife, even though he could be a captain of society, he could be a captain of the industry, he could be somebody big outside. But in a formal portrait, you look at that. So isn't that even in pictorial like that, you could see who wears the pants in the house?
I think that's
So-
quite an interesting observation, right? It's like, and I think for most of us, we know what the Peranakan culture is. I would really like to hear what, non-Peranakan sort of like, think of, all these
So
portraits that we
perhaps
see.
we
It's
could
like,
open it up to the
sure, it's
floor
like,
so that you could have a more lively debate, and maybe you all could give a little bit of your observation, how you all were brought up. Is it okay? Kaki kangkang ke tak kaki kangkang pun tak mengapa. I just wondered, why is it that they had to adopt such fierce stance like that? It's because it's not very, it doesn't seem very to be sitting with your legs wide.
It's not kaki kangkang.
It's not kaki kangkang.
Following the confusion, the old China stance.
I see.
And
That's right, is it? I see.
the foot on the ground, tongue on the ground.
Ah, okay, okay. Thank you for your explanation. So perhaps, Dr. David, if we could open it up to the floor.
She has a question.
Okay, yes, you are Nyonya. Nyonya Susan has got a question.
I'm a young generation of European. But
Welcome,
my
Nyonya.
observation from my father mother, macam matriarchy or patriarchy. Kalau kahwin Baba-Nyonya, I feel it will be matriarchy. In terms of command of the household. And also the
Pantang-pantang.
anak semua, dia ikut bapa. Patriarchy. Tapi bila dah campur
Ka-
dengan I kahwin campur. So garang memang garang orang ni. My husband tak boleh faham. Dia tak faham langsung. Tapi ikut adat dah tak ada. Sebab husband is Chinese Indian. So ikut dia punya adat. Jadi my anak-anak semua dah tak tahu dah. Tak bapa pun tak tahu. Dia rasa dia tidak dia cakap bapa.
I see.
So I feel kalau kahwin Baba-Nyonya mesti matriarchy power is there lah. Tapi ikut adat memang patriarchy lah. Sebab adat Baba-Nyonya.
That's a good observation, Nyonya Susan. What about your thoughts, Dr. David?
well, like I say, I think each family will have sort of like whatever. I am sort of like talking about or using examples from the golden age. Yeah, it's like, in your stately mansions where you have your gundates and whatever. It's like, in that context, I think, the
I would look at orang bukan orang berada, orang yang biasa macam yes, the ladies are the one who rules the house. My father, kalau let's say my mother cakap lah, sebab my mother ada 10 anak. My mother cakap penat, tak terjaga. Then my father cakap, kalau rumah buat jaga, lu kaki sudah pergi kerja. Buat duduk rumah. So,
but you see the division is very clear, right? It's like
so household, even my uncle also, let's say my auntie dah jadi widow. My auntie, two aunties balik rumah my grandfather.
I see.
Balik rumah my grandfather, and they become like the one who rules the kitchen, who prepare all the makanan one.
Question to the speaker. Explain when you go to these old houses in America, I'm not sure, when you enter the front door, you see the photograph. It's not the pressure, it's a measure. You notice it.
Oh, that's true.
Shan Museum, yeah.
What is the reason for the photograph, black and white, above the altar table of the measure?
Tian sort of like said that, I mean, kind of like practically, a lot of the Nyonyas outlives your babas. For some reason, I don't know, because they were working so hard to establish themselves or whatever, a lot of them dropped dead like at 50. Yeah, and it's the Nyonyas, and this is probably also perpetuating your matriarchy because they lived longer than the babas. And so, one of the explanation is that, it is the portraits sort of like commemorate whoever they remembered from the past generation. So it could have been like, the matriarch that was presiding, that was controlling everything. And so, they feel that the honor of, presiding over the house would be her portrait, at the ancestral hall. But that is also, quite interesting. I mean, I was saying about my great grandfather who was actually, had the last say in the household. his mother was your typical sort of like matriarchal Nyonya. It's like, he in fact it was like, the last gunde that he had, she brought her into the house when she died at her funeral, when nobody could contest or make, any fuss over him bringing a concubine into the house.
Wow.
Okay. So again, I think, it depends on the generation. Yeah, it depends on the Nonyas as well. Like, some Nonyas are not so garang, right? And they don't wield power. It's like, so the other wives who are secondary wives who are more, power hungry, maybe, more controlling and more manipulative. Yeah, so.
Happening in China.
Mm,
Man and
exactly.
Any other comments? I'm sure you have.
Actually, the time photography, because the women outlive the men, and when the women are still around, they can afford to take photographs. They are between
Actually, well, the thing is that like a lot of them had lots of photographs, right? So yeah, so at different stages of their lives, this is the thing. So I'm not so sure about the explanation. Yeah, it's like I think there is quite specific in terms of who they are trying to honor in the ancestral hall when they put the portrait of a Nyonya there. It's like and she could well live up to like her 90s, like, our Queen Elizabeth, right? Who is, yeah. And after you're controlling the Rumah Abu for like, 50 years, who else would you sort of like commemorate other than, someone like that who's, been the matriarch for like 50 years, right? It's like, so, well, that's my explanation. It's like,
Is there anyone else who would like to tell a little bit about? Yeah, you are Nyonya?
my name is Lisa. I'm a different sort of Nyonya because I come from my grandmother. Speak louder so that people on Zoom can hear us. Yeah, okay. I'm actually, my grandmother actually comes from Batavia, originally Batavia, and then eventually moving to Medan. She was actually born in Singapore, but the whole family were actually located in Indonesia. She's very Indonesian in outlook, and yes, I can confirm that she was very educated for her time because she went to Dutch school, Dutch, and she was also educated in Chinese because of her father, but not Mandarin, Hokkien. This was the, I think, the lingua franca of where she came from. So, for me, my question to Dr. Neo is this: does religion play any form of influence in whether this fluidity between the matrilineal and patrilineal outlook that Peranakans have? I'm talking generally about Peranakans, yeah? Would the influence of religion sway perhaps the focus, the matrilineal focus, or more matrilineal focus? Because from what I see, if you had a Rumah Abu and if you came from that sort of cultural or spiritual or religious sort of a background, ancestor worship and all, I would see all the culture would be definitely the patriarchal. But you see, in my grandmother's case, she was always Dutch reformed. She cannot remember a time when she was not, when there was ancestor worship and all. She was always Dutch reformed, having lived in Indonesia. So as a result of that, her outlook was very matrilineal. When she married my grandfather, she called him a useless husband. It was an arranged marriage, okay? But they remained together for the rest of their lives because primarily simply because my grandfather eventually took out a very bad habit that many Chinese men of his generation had: opium addiction. Okay, he was an opium smoker and opium eater and all. He left things in red and green. He had a thriving belacan business. He bought fish from Burma at that time and sold it all over the Nusantara. But his business collapsed because of opium.
Well, that
And my grandmother took over, everything started from scratch. And it was very matrilineal after that. All the property went to everybody almost equally, with a time in between a little bit more to her sons. But that was only because she just followed what her husband would have done. His property she administered, his inheritances, she administered everything to her own children.
well, this I think is very much of what we see in the culture, right? Because it's like, you know, your whole Baba Ta'aguna idea. It's like, you know, and the Babas were privileged as well. It's like, you know, so a lot of them were into wine women and whatnot. It's like, you know, and
I'm wondering whether my grandmother's influence, that strong Dutch form influence, that actually altered the way she ran the household, the way she ran the business, the way she viewed things. And I'm just wondering if anybody else would have that same sort of perception. What if you had a different religion? Would it be as sweet? And she founded the church in Kuala Lumpur. That was what my grandmother did.
Yes, it's like, you know, I'm sure her education and that would have influenced how she thought. Yeah, it's like, I think when I actually have something on Mrs. Lee Chung Guan, it's like, you know, I think you can sort of like see that with her life as well. But yeah, okay, it's like, you know, should I just get through my slides? It's like, okay, I think we're sort of like, running out of time. So let me just try to quickly go through a few things. Yeah. Okay. So the next slide I have is of Mrs. Lee Chung Guan. Yeah. Her maiden name is Tan Teck Neo, and she's known as the Diamond Queen in Singapore. Yeah. It's like, you know, so okay. This quote of her of her, yeah, that says she was a woman who achieved many firsts. She was one of the first Straits Chinese women to be educated in English and also first Chinese woman to drive a car in Singapore. No ordinary car, but a sleek Daimler. She was the first Chinese lady to be awarded the member of the British Empire in 1818. Yeah. So she was this socialite. Her diamond collection actually rivaled the Sultana of Johor, which is why she was called the Diamond Queen. Yeah, and she was the leading light of Singapore society for 5 decades. She was the third daughter of Tan Keong Siak, and he was the one who actually hired Miss Blackmore, a Methodist missionary, to educate his 3 daughters. Her parties were legendary. It's like, you know, her Semayang Abu as well was apparently, you know, really immaculate. And she glided in and out of private and public patriarchy like very easily. Yeah, at times she would outdrink and outdance younger males and babas. It's like, you know, and yeah, so, you know, it's interesting. I mean, in terms of like what you're saying with your grandmother, it's like this is what I think is so fascinating with the Nyonyas. It's like, you know, I think they're just as fascinating and as colorful as the babas in terms of their public life, right? Because within the domestic realm, yeah, they were really not to be trifled with. Yeah, it's like okay, it's like let me sorry. Okay, the next slide I think is quite interesting. Right? It's like, you know, where I have some points there about female oppression. And what is interesting, I think, is that the Nyonyas were oppressed by other Nyonyas and not by men, yeah? It's like, which I think is really also quite interesting in the culture. So the weddings are usually match made, yeah, and often for political reasons, and these are usually orchestrated by the Nyonyas. Yeah, it's like, so marrying empires with empires so that their wealth and their influence will actually grow. Yeah, and a lot of times your Nyonyas would only meet their husbands on the wedding day. Okay, so this is a quote. This is a quote of your tyrannical mother-in-law, yeah, from Lee Chunyo, the earlier picture that I have of her, your first queen scholar and physician in the Straits Settlements, where she says that the tyranny and unjust treatment of the daughter-in-law is a special privilege to the mother-in-law who exercises it without compunction or mercy. Yeah, it's like, and these are also some sayings within the culture, which I think is really quite interesting. One, maki anak sinde menantu. Yeah, it's like, so mother-in-laws do not have the right to maki your daughters-in-law because they didn't raise them. Yeah, so they insult them by underhandedly insult them by scolding their own daughters because they have the right to scold their daughters but not their daughters-in-law. Yeah, so it's like, my sister thinks that's very sick lah, right? But it's like, this is your sort of like female bullying that goes on within your Peranakan household. Yeah, and then the other saying is some sedap sampai nyo lalu pun tak sedar. Yeah, so it's like, you're enjoying your food, or it's so good that, your mother-in-law passes and you don't even realizes that. And of course, it's like, no daughter-in-law can afford that. No Nyonya daughter-in-law can afford that, right? It's like, because you're supposed to attend to your mother-in-law at all times. Okay. So this is, I think, really quite interesting in terms of the dynamics that you would find in a Peranakan household. And then if you have gunde and concubines, yeah, it's like, who's tussling for power or tussling for recognition for their children, or even sort of like, shares in the estate and whatnot. It's like, it gets very complex. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of your non-Nonyas, their only upward mobility would be to marry as a gunde. Yeah, it's like, because your Nonyas are your principal wives. It's like, so if you're a non-Nonya, your Cantonese gundes that we find in most of our households, they were all your sing-song girls and whatnot, that became gundes so that they can sire sons for the babas. Okay, so, I think we're talking about a very sort of like unique cultural background here with the Nyonyas. Yeah, it's like, okay, I have this last quote here by another person that I interviewed, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah, it's like, history repeats itself. Women, we are our worst enemies. I believe women are bullying each other. The Babas left home to the women to run. As far as my family is concerned, the Babas were the breadwinners. They don't care what you do. If you want to play Chucky, you play lah. These marriages were match made. So women's role is to reproduce, to have and look after children, to bring up sons. If you talk about love as what we have now, where there is care and mutual respect, I don't believe that was something that was featured in their lives. That woman is to be the mother, to make sure that the surname goes down, and at the end of the day, the men left all to women at home. It is the women who are their worst enemies. The mothers-in-law will do exactly the same thing to their daughters-in-law. They suffered because their mothers-in-law gave them hell. They were doing the same thing. So I believe it has to stop with me. But I had a good and beautiful mother-in-law. In life, many times, it is the same women who are their worst enemies. You can see the women who are creating hell. Two sisters in the series, the Little Nyonya, who are cheating, always the same women. The men couldn't care less. Yeah, it's like, So that's pretty much what I sort of like have. Yeah, it's like, and maybe we can continue talking about, whether you
Yeah,
guys
perhaps
think.
because we
um,
time is running short, we'll take one or two more questions from the floor. Any more questions online? Any more? Any one of you would like to share a little bit, some interesting?
Sorry, David, somebody asked, where is that quote from?
That quote is from an interviewee. So these are from the interviews that I did with Nyonyas.
I think it's important that you realize that this is anecdotal. This is just it's not a generalization.
Yes.
It's not a comment on
Yeah, it's like, so exactly.
It's an interview.
Yeah, it's like, so there are a couple of quotes that are from the interviewees, but I think it's quite telling in terms of like what they say. So yeah. Exactly. It's like, so things have also changed. It's like, yeah.
So if there are no forthcoming questions, we will conclude this very lively, well, not lively debate, with this very insightful talk. So I would say that there is no clear-cut line that we can say that our culture is matriarchal or patriarchal. It depends on in my opinion, I think it depends on the dynamics of each family. Today, I think it's a little bit outdated. Today is more, we are talking about shared responsibility. Your last words, Dr. David.
Okay, so what I found interesting with the interviews that I did, it's like, so some interviews that I had were actually trying to get away from your whole stereotypical idea of your garang nyonya. Yeah, but somewhere in the interview, your feisty nyonya, either auntie, grandma, whatever, would still creep up. Yeah, so this is really quite interesting that I found with the interviews that I conducted. It's like that, yes, there is this, and I think, perhaps something for you guys to think about, and also ask in terms of your own background. It's like I think the very first quote that I had was very interesting in terms of how that Nyonya was saying that, perhaps these are cultural things that I have actually picked up. Yeah, it's like and it's really part of the culture. So yeah.
So if that's all, then we will end this session. Thank you very much for this interesting talk. To the audience, to the Zoom audience, Dr. David, please enjoy the tea. Thank you for coming. Kamsia.
Hey, if you guys want to continue talking, go get your tea and talk about this. Yeah, I'm more than happy to.
Can I just make one announcement?
This is our second last virtually yours before our next AGM coming up, where there will be a new committee that will be voted in. The next session will be in July sometime, mid-July. I don't have the date in my mind, okay? So I will make that announcement later on, but there will be a last session. And I think Nyonya Kepo is making a comeback for the last program, yeah? So keep a lookout for that session as well.
Yeah.
But thank you everyone for coming along today, and also for our virtual audience who has been actually very active, and you haven't been able to respond
Oh,
to
I
all of
see.
the answers as well. But I'm
Were there a lot of
sure-
Zoom participants?
Yes, there's about 20 or 30 participants online as well. Yeah. So thank you everyone, and for those who are here, enjoy the tea. Those who are virtual and at Zoom, maybe you would like to come along to the next physical event, so you can enjoy the tea. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Good job, David. Yes.
There is